Like for most residents in Barangay San Rafael, the quarry town of Montalban had been full of potholes as the roads leading to it. The quarry was the primary source of income of most families in the area, but low family income had made the roads of their lives even more difficult. Children themselves had not been spared. PUNLA SA TAO Foundation, through the ILO-IPEC, had designed a system that would allow the members of these poor communities to manage the vulnerabilities of their lives better. Mimosa Rodriguez was one of the pioneer members of the Microfinance program when it started its operations in June 2000. Convinced by the merits of savings that the program espoused, she opened separate savings account for her and her husband Doming. For the Rodriguezes, saving had become very convenient. They need not spend 16 pesos for fare to the nearest bank, nor spend 2 hours waiting in line. With the alternative banking system in place in the community, saving small amounts had become possible. When their first child, Dominique, was born in March 20, 2000, Mimi right away opened 2 saving accounts for her. I opened 2 accounts, one for education and the other one for health. Every week for the last 10 months, Mimi set aside 70 pesos from the earnings of her sari-sari store for her family savings. Though their savings could be withdrawn for emergency purposes, Mimi promised herself this early that she would exhaust all means first before dipping into Sam's account. I want her to become a lawyer. Becoming a doctor is more expensive. Mimi hoped that when Sam reached 18 years old, her savings would be enough to cover her college education. She would want her daughter to achieve what she, a high school undergraduate, had not. So barely a month old, Sam already had 130 pesos in her savings account. But not all children in Lon were as lucky as Sam to have their education partially insured. In 1997, when CO Multiversity, an ILO-IPEC partner NGO, first focused on child labor issues in the area, 87 children had been identified to be mga batang durugista. Children as young as 5 years old were spending hours in a day manually crushing rocks in open quarries. The primary targets of the microfinance program were mothers like Nympha Afape, whose children needed to work to augment the family income. The ultimate aim of the program is to improve family incomes through savings and loan that they may take their children out of the labor market and put them back in school. Nympha relied on the earnings of her sari-sari store to meet the basic needs of her family. With 4 children, all of whom were in school, her husband's 187 daily wage as a laborer for a local crusher was simply not enough.
Hoy, tumingin kayo rito para uling. Tinatago yung mga mo. Uling talaga.
All her children helped out tending the store, even the youngest, whom they affectionately called Bunso. Since the quarry business slowed down in the last 2 years, income of the sari-sari store likewise decreased. Before, many workers took their snacks here. Michael and Edmund's contribution from pagpipit to the family income had been valuable. They just do it when they have time. You see, they alternately tend to the store. They usually work during school vacations. When they are done with their store tending duties, that's when they work in a quarry.
Ngayong bakasyon. Kaya kung kailan sila mag-off na dito,
diretso sila.
Oo.
Sino naman ang nag-aano sa kanila?
Yung kapitbahay namin.
That time, Mark and Edmund had just come from pagpipit. With their work over, it was time to play. Since both were earning, Mark and Edmund became associate savers of the MFI. Weekly, they set aside 5 pesos from their earnings for their savings, while the rest of their income went to the family coffers. They had accumulated over 300 pesos in savings each. They both planned to withdraw some of their savings when school opened in June. This was where Mark and Edmund spent their time when not in school. earning 10 pesos per tortilla.
Ilang taon ka na? 14 po. 14? Ilang, ano ka na nag-aaral ka rin?
Second, pagpasok.
Kano kinikita niyo? Kasi gusto ko malaman kung magkano sa 3/4 ang kinikita. So,
Depende po sa, iba pong mahihila sa pastor, tatrabaho ng Lunes, tas sasalandra po
It
ng
depends.
Sabado.
If you work from Monday till
Pagka
Saturday, you would earn
na-
around 120 pesos.
Pumapatak din po ng mga 120.
isang linggo.
Kulang-kulang 300 po.
Mark was graduating from high school the next school year. With the money he saved, he planned to buy new school shoes and leave the rest for project expenses. After graduation, he planned to work his way through school by working in a poultry.
Kahit yung na lang pong
He wanted to be a seaman.
My uncle was a seaman, and they were better off than most.
Edmund wanted to be a soldier. These dreams, they believed, simple as they were, would take them far from the world of pagpipitpit. The relatively low socio-economic status of Pandacan's residents made the area a high risk for child labor. In fact, many of the children were already working in nearby markets and construction areas, and many had become a domestic helper. Pandacan as a site and Visayan Forum as its ILO-IPEC partner NGO were natural choices for the PUNLA program. Estelita Garcia had been one of the first few members who was able to avail of the loan component of the MFI program. After 3 months of regular savings, MFI members were entitled to access an initial loan of 2,000 pesos primarily for livelihood purposes. In Aling Lita's case, she used her initial loan as additional capital for a sari-sari store. Her family's primary source of income was this sari-sari store. Even the allowance of her 2 children who were still in school came from the money that the store brought in. Aling Lita's husband had been in and out of jobs since 1972. What more, he sustained a head injury. His regular SSS disability pension of 2,000 per month was his contribution to the family income. Her savings were not just for educational purposes. She planned to make her savings grow in 1 year, then withdraw some amount to be used in expanding her sari-sari store business. The rest of her savings she'd withdraw when her children needed money for their projects and other school needs. Isa, her youngest daughter, also planned to become an associate saver of the program. She's used her income from selling ice candy to open an account with the MFI. Most of the 430 member savers in Pandacan were qualified to loan, but only 10 had availed of the loan privilege. A good number had no business they could infuse the loan product in. Out of 13 who loaned, majority used it either as additional capital for a sari-sari store or buy and sell business. Ruby used her first and second loans to augment her business capital. With a bigger capital, Ruby's chances of buying more products and consequently earning more from the business were considerably higher. To offset the high expense months like June when classes opened, Ruby had begun preparing for it by saving 25 pesos a week. She was not the only saver in the family. Her 3 children, Joyce Ann, who was in high school, Angela and Mark Joseph, both in the elementary grades, were associate savers of the program. The children saved a peso a day from their allowance for their savings account. In fact, Angela had already experienced withdrawing 200 pesos from her account. She used it to treat her friends during her birthday in February. She planned to withdraw again in June so she could buy a pair of shoes. Ruby wanted her 3 children to finish school, that's why she was saving, and had encouraged them to save for their education as well. Maria Carmela, the eldest, reached only third-year high school and married at the age of 16. It was embarrassing. She was too young.
Bakit ko nakakaya? Yung mga lola nila, mas minsan, mismo sila. Talagang ako kuya!
The primary objective of the loan component was to give mothers an alternative income-generating activity so their economic status would improve. Violeta Fabinar used the 2-loan cycle to her food vending business. She did this to help her husband, who worked as a bank security guard and earned the $250 daily minimum wage. But it was from the business that she got the daily household expenses. In a day, she could gain a net income of 200 pesos. The business also provided the family's meals. Violeta has 4 children. Mark, who was in third-year high school, Tadeo, who was in his second year, Peter Paul in first year, and Maria Catalina, who was in grade 3. Maria Catalina was the only associate saver of the 4. Maria Catalina's savings still came from her mother's pocket, but she was already contributing some from her allowance. Her children were the primary reasons Violeta was saving in the MFI program. She wanted to see these savings grow so she could use it for her children's education. 10 months into the program, she had 1,000 pesos in her savings account. Not once had she withdrawn any amount from her account. She also wanted to have money set aside for emergencies. The MFI was her only savings outlet. Meantime, Violeta was focusing her efforts in taking care of her business. She was already selling ice candy, viands, snacks, and many others. Still, she wanted to add more products and more variety to her mini store. She already knew what to do with the next loan. In Barangay Santo Niño in Armoc City, the 5 pesos usually considered loose change was already a significant amount to members of the MFI, largely composed of farmers and tillers. The seasonal income from rice farming was so low and basic expenses high that Aling Anita Formentera and her neighbors could only afford to save that much per week. The little amount that she saved, she believed, could be a big help to her. She was saving for her children's education. She still had 2 children to send to school, both only elementary students. She used her 500 initial loan to buy a few items she could sell in her neighborhood. No matter how minimal her goods were, at least they kept money regularly coming in. Her next loan she planned to use as capital for rice that she could sell per kilo. The irony of it was, as rice farmers, they could not even keep enough rice for their own consumption. Half of the harvest usually went to the landowner, and the rest was used to pay off the debts they acquired during the planting season. Saving 5 pesos weekly then was not a joke to Aling Anita. It could spell her family and her children's future. Aling Crescencia of Barangay San Pablo relied heavily on the 2,000 weekly gross income that her small sari-sari store brought in. That was why, when she availed of the 500 initial loan, she used the money to buy 2 cases of soft drinks and tuba or coconut wine that she could sell. Her husband died 9 years ago, leaving her to raise their 9 children alone. It was difficult raising them from the salary of a jornal that Aling Crescencia had been. Her children, early in their lives, assisted their mother by working too. 3 of her elder children never reached high school. 2 were now full-time tillers or jornal at a plantation nearby. The other one, Clarissa, was recruited to work as factory worker in Manila. The four younger children, because of financial assistance of their elder siblings, had it better. At least they were in school. One was a third-year college student, one was in high school, and the two youngest were elementary graders. Still, when school was out, Dante, who was 13 years old, and Sunny, who was 12, also worked at the plantations, like their elder brothers did. Had it not been for the contribution that her working children gave to the household, Aling Crescentia alone would not have been able to make ends meet. Aling Crescentia saved 20 to 50 per week in an MFI program and had Sunny enrolled as an associate saver. Both savings were intended for educational expenses. For Aling Crescentia, sending her children to school had been her biggest problem. Not only was the tuition fee of her college student high, fare and projects even made the expenses higher. Her savings and that of Sunny could help them when school opened in June and expenses shoot up again. In the Hornal barangay of San Pablo, children as young as 8 years old working alongside their parents in the sugar cane plantations was a common sight. The hectares and hectares of land could have been a vast playground for the children in a community. Instead, it became their working site. For 60 per day, the community members, both old and young, worked tilling the sugar plantations from 6 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon. It is an established fact that low family income urged the parents to let their children work so they could help the family meet its basic needs. Aling Perpetua acknowledged that with 6 children to feed, 4 of whom were in school, it was impossible to do without the eldest, RJ's contribution to the family income from his work in the plantation. Despite the community's measly income, the members managed to save 20 a week. The most common use for the savings was for educational needs of their children and for emergency cases. Merlinda Villacorta dipped into her savings account whenever she needed fare to go to her Metro Aid job in the city or when her children needed to buy materials for their school projects. What the savings and loan program had tangibly done then was reduce the desperation and vulnerabilities of these poor families by providing an alternative community banking system. This is what the MFI program had been all about. Though the ultimate aim was to take children out of the labor market by improving family incomes, it would be unrealistic to believe that 1 year of saving and a few cycles of loan would be enough to achieve that. Children were still working, and parents could still barely afford to meet the elementary needs of the family. But the difference was, after 1 year, the members and their children had begun preparing for the future by saving. The difference was, after 1 year, families had begun being more self-reliant, knowing they had financial options in the community microfinance program. RJ and Michael went to the local high school during weekdays and spent their weekends and school vacations working in the sugarcane plantations. Sometimes, after school ended in the afternoon, both would go to the city market and offer their service to the market vendors, usually fetching pails of water for them. But both had been setting aside 10 pesos for their earnings weekly for their savings. They saved for their school expenses like fare to and from school and for school projects. Michael admired his math teacher and wanted to teach just like him. RJ didn't know what to take in college, but he wanted to be a
Singer! Kabalo ka di mo kanta.
Aking mahal, sa'yo ako'y nagpapalang kahit sa awit. Bukas tayo'y magkikita, ako'y hindi makakapunta. Bakit ako'y lalayo, karagdagan lang sa'yo. Nalaman ko, ako'y niloko mo.
The presence of working children, not only in Ormoc or in Pandacan and Montalban, is a vicious circle that could not easily be solved. But with stories like RJ and Michael's, who in just a year had begun saving 10 pesos for their dreams, there is hope that this cycle could be cut. Maybe when Michael becomes a teacher and RJ a singer, their children need not work for food like they did.
Anong iniisip mong trabaho?
Sana po yung ano lang, po yung sa poultry, yung kahit yun na lang pong trabaho na yun. Kasi po yung uncle ko po, seaman po, tas nakaangat po sila sa ano nila, buhay nila.
Ikaw, anong gusto mo maging?
Sundalo po.
Sundalo sa PMA. Sundalo ang gusto mo.